Black girl was bullied for her extremely dark skin until her story went viral. From the moment Amaka Okafor stepped into St. Helena's High School, she knew she was different, not because she was new, not because she was Nigerian, but because of her skin. A deep, rich obsidian tone that gleamed under the pale Vermont sun, unapologetic in its beauty. In Nigeria, her grandmother used to say, "Amaka, your skin drinks the sun. It holds it in ways lighter skins cannot. You carry royalty." But here it was treated like a stain. On her first day, the school hallways buzzed with an unspoken message, "You don't belong here." It wasn't always words, not at first. It was the glances that lingered too long, the subtle shifting away when she passed, the fake whispers behind cupped hands, the way some students widened their eyes as if trying to measure how dark a human being could possibly be. She heard the words pitch black before she even reached her locker. And then came Heather Monroe. Heather was not cruel in the obvious way. Her cruelty was the kind that smiled in your face as it dismantled your dignity. Blonde, blue-eyed, with a family name engraved on every plaque in the building, Heather was the queen bee. Her friends orbited her like pale satellites, always laughing too loudly at her jokes. "Hey, new girl," Heather called out that first day, "did you get lost on your way to Africa?" The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Amaka smiled, a tight, polite smile. She would not give them the satisfaction. But Heather wasn't done, not even close. At lunch, Amaka sat alone. The cafeteria, bright with banners of diversity and inclusion, was filled with students who had no idea how to practice either. Heather and her entourage sauntered over. "Is it true that in Nigeria they bleach their skin to look human?" Heather asked, her voice dripping with mock curiosity. "I mean, is this permanent?" she added, pointing at Amaka's face, as though her skin were a temporary tattoo. Amaka took a slow sip of her water. "Yes, permanent, unlike ignorance which can be cured." A few students nearby stifled a laugh. Heather's lips twitched, but she walked away, leaving a trail of manufactured confidence. That night, Amaka lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her chest was heavy, not with shame but with exhaustion. How many more times would she have to explain her right to exist without being dissected? By the fourth day, the attacks became more creative. Amaka opened her locker to find it stuffed with black construction paper, sheets and sheets of it spilling onto the floor. A sticky note sat on top, "In case you need a mirror." That day, she skipped lunch. She sat in the library instead, sketching in her notebook. Her drawings were always of faces, dark-skinned, beautiful, adorned with crowns, beads, and fierce expressions. In those pages, she was not mocked, she was worshipped. But the school bell always rang, and reality always returned. Heather cornered her near the girls' restroom some days later. "Hey Amaka, Sephora called. They said they're out of your shade. Maybe try industrial paint next time." Her minions giggled. Amaka looked at them, her gaze steady. She had learned that silence was sometimes louder than words. But the cracks were forming. It wasn't just Heather. It was the silence of teachers who heard but chose to not get involved. It was the way adults offered sympathetic smiles but no action. At night, she avoided mirrors. Not because she was ashamed, but because she was tired of fighting to see beauty in what the world insisted was ugly. Again, Amaka found a note slipped into her locker. "You should wash yourself. Maybe you'll find the real you under all that black." Attached was a small, unopened bar of soap. She stared at it for a long time. This was no longer a joke, it never was. The soap felt heavy in her hand, not in weight but in meaning. A message carved from centuries of colonial arrogance, still finding its voice in a 16-year-old bully. For the first time, Amaka felt her throat tighten. She could feel the sting behind her eyes. But tears were not for school hallways. She would not give them that. That evening, as snowflakes drifted quietly outside her window, Amaka opened her sketchbook again. This time, she drew herself standing tall, surrounded by girls who looked like her, ebony skin gleaming, heads held high. Underneath she wrote, "They call it too dark. I call it the original light." She closed the book, but not the pain. The next morning, she would walk back into that school. But things were about to change. On Wednesday morning, the assault began before homeroom. Amaka reached into her locker and recoiled. Her fingers were slick with a cold, slimy substance. Someone had lined the inside with shoe polish, the thick, black kind used to shine leather. "Thought we'd help you keep that glow," a voice sneered from behind. Heather Monroe again. Only this time she wasn't alone. Half the class stood watching, some giggling, others just staring. Amaka turned slowly, wiping her hand with a tissue, her face a mask of composure. "You must really think about me a lot," she said quietly. "It's flattering, really." Heather's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, we're just fascinated. It's like seeing a walking shadow. Do you disappear in the dark, or do you scare yourself when the lights go out?" The laughter that followed was louder this time, bolder, because no one had stopped them yet, because no teacher had intervened, because the silence of authority is the loudest permission. Amaka said nothing more, but her heart pounded as she closed her locker. By Friday, the whispers had turned into a coordinated plan. Heather's minions, emboldened by their queen bee, prepared their latest humiliation. This time they wanted an audience, they wanted phones recording, they wanted likes. During lunch, as Amaka sat alone at her usual corner table, the trap was sprung. Heather approached, holding a pristine white napkin. "Hey, Amaka, I think you dropped this." Before Amaka could react, Heather reached out and aggressively rubbed the napkin against Amaka's cheek, as if trying to wipe her skin. The cafeteria exploded with laughter, but Heather wasn't done. She held up the now smudged napkin, theatrically inspecting it. Would you look at that? Still black. Guess it's not dirt. Or maybe it's just stubborn." The words echoed. Mocking. Degrading. Phones were out, recording every second. Amaka sat frozen for a moment. The sting wasn't the napkin. It was the casual cruelty, the collective approval of it, the way so many faces watched, entertained by her humiliation. And then slowly, deliberately, she stood. The cafeteria grew quiet. Amaka reached into her bag and pulled out her own phone. No shaking hands. No trembling lips. She turned the camera on herself, inked napkin and all. "My name is Amaka Okafor," she said, her voice calm but resonating with something deeper. "Today, a girl tried to rub my skin off because she was taught that anything this dark can't be real, that beauty has a limit and it ends with her reflection." Heather tried to interrupt. "No one said," but Amaka raised a hand, silencing her with ease. "This isn't new," Amaka continued. "It's centuries old. It's ignorance wrapped in a joke. But it stops today. Because I am done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger." She panned the camera across the cafeteria, capturing faces, some sneering, others suddenly uncomfortable. "I don't need your acceptance. I brought my own." She ended the video. Uploaded it, not for attention, for truth. By the time Amaka reached her last class, her phone was vibrating non-stop. The video had spread, first among black students across the state, then influencers picked it up. By evening, news outlets were reaching out. Amaka sat on her bed, watching as her face, her unapologetically dark, beautiful face, filled the screens of people who saw not shame but strength. Thousands of comments flooded in. "You are stunning. Thank you for standing up. I was that girl too. You're not alone. This isn't just about school. This is systemic. We're with you." Heather Monroe just became a national example of what not to be. For the first time since arriving at St. Helena's, Amaka didn't feel alone. Her father knocked softly and entered, holding his phone. "I saw the video, Amaka," he said, sitting beside her. "You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every girl who was made to feel invisible." Amaka leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think it'll change anything, Daddy?" He smiled, pressing her hand. "You've already started the change. Now watch it grow." The next morning the school was buzzing, but not with whispers, with reporters. with angry emails from parents, alumni, even former students who had stayed silent for too long. Heather Monroe's reign of cruelty had turned into public disgrace. Her family's carefully curated image was unraveling. Apologies were issued, meetings were called, policies were suddenly reviewed. But Amaka stayed quiet. She had said what she needed to say, and the world had finally listened. The Monday after Amaka's video went viral was unlike any other. The same hallways where she had been taunted felt heavier, slower, as if the building itself was unsure how to behave around her now. There were no sarcastic greetings, no construction paper jokes, no shoe polish pranks. Heather Monroe was nowhere in sight. The bullies had gone quiet. But not out of kindness. The silence wasn't a truce. It was fear, fear of exposure, fear of accountability. As Amaka walked toward her locker, she noticed something even more jarring than the absence of mockery. People were watching her with curiosity, with something close to respect. Some even nodded politely. A few students who had once laughed along now looked away, pretending to be deeply interested in their phones. She wasn't naive enough to think they had changed overnight, but their power had shifted. The whispers that once wounded her were now recoiling in the light she had cast. In the teacher's lounge, her name was the only topic. The administration had been flooded with calls and emails. Why was nothing done? Is this how St. Helena's protects its minority students? What policies do you even have against racism? For years, St. Helena's had worn diversity like a badge, parading its 1 or 2 token students of color in brochures, boasting about exchange programs. But when it came to confronting real, lived racism within its walls, they had failed. Publicly. Amaka's video had pulled the mask off. The principal, Dr. Markson, requested to meet her privately. She was invited to his office, offered a bottle of water, and greeted with a rehearsed smile. "We're so proud of how you handled yourself, Amaka," he said, as though her strength absolved their negligence. But Amaka was done with polite conversations. "With all due respect, Dr. Markson, you're not proud of how I handled it. You're embarrassed that it took a 16-year-old going viral for you to notice." The words landed with precision. To his credit, he didn't argue. A school-wide assembly was hastily organized. For the first time, the stage was given to Amaka. As she walked up to the podium, she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes. But this time it was different. They weren't mocking. They were waiting. "I was never invisible," Amaka began. "But some of you chose not to see me. You laughed at my skin because you were taught silently or loudly that dark is less, that melanin is something to be mocked, not marveled at." Her voice did not waver. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. Guilt is useless if it doesn't lead to change. I'm here to ask, what will you do now that you've been forced to see?" The auditorium was quiet. No snickers, no whispers, just the truth hanging in the air. Amaka stepped back, her heart pounding but her spirits soaring. The applause was hesitant at first, but it grew. Louder, sincere. For the first time, she wasn't clapping for herself in her head. They were clapping for her. For real. Amaka's speech was recorded, again, this time by the school. This time shared with pride. But the impact wasn't limited to those polished hallways. News outlets featured her story as a symbol of how racism still festers in quiet, prestigious spaces. Influencers praised her poise, her words. Black-owned brands reached out, offering collaborations. Universities invited her to speak at their diversity panel. One particularly powerful moment came when a mother sent her a video of her own daughter, a little girl with skin just as dark, holding up a drawing she had made of Amaka in a superhero cape. The caption read, "My daughter thinks you're magic. Thank you for showing her she is too." Amaka cried when she saw it. Not out of sadness, out of a kind of relief she had never felt before. Her suffering had not been in vain. Her voice had reached further than she ever imagined. While Amaka's star rose, Heather Monroe's world was crumbling. Her family's charity lost donors. Her social media accounts were flooded with criticism. For the first time, Heather was experiencing the isolation she had so casually inflicted on others. But Amaka didn't gloat. When reporters asked her what she thought about Heather's backlash, she answered simply, "Accountability isn't cruelty, it's correction. I hope she learns. I really do." With support pouring in, Amaka decided to turn the momentum into something tangible. She launched an online initiative called Melanin Mirrors, a platform where Black girls from around the world could share their stories, art, and celebrate their beauty in all its shades. It wasn't just a hashtag, it was a movement. Workshops were held. Partnerships with schools began. Even some of St. Helena's own faculty volunteered to undergo sensitivity training, something unheard of before Amaka's stand. For the first time, Amaka felt like she was building something bigger than herself. She wasn't just surviving, she was leading. Weeks passed, but the echoes of Amaka's stand did not fade. What had begun as a viral video transformed into a living, breathing movement. Every day, new stories poured in. Messages from girls who had never dared to show their natural skin in public, from boys who admitted to once mocking the darkest girl in the room because they were too scared to admire her openly. For the first time, Amaka wasn't just the girl they laughed at. She was the girl they listened to. She was the girl they looked up to. But beneath the headlines and hashtags, she was still just Amaka, a 16-year-old girl trying to navigate a world that had once tried to erase her. And some wounds, no matter how strong you are, don't heal in a week. One evening, her father found her sitting in her room, sketchbook open but untouched. "You've drawn so many versions of yourself," he said, taking a seat beside her. "But do you see the real Amaka yet?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been so busy proving I deserve to be seen. I'm not sure I've stopped to really look." Her father nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. It was of Amaka as a toddler, sitting on her grandmother's lap in Nigeria. Both of them were smiling, both of them radiant in their dark skin, as if they carried the sun within. "She called you Onyenyechi," he said softly, "God's gift. Not because of your skin, not because of your face, but because of your spirit. You've always been light, Amaka. You don't need anyone's permission to shine." For the first time in weeks, the tension in her chest loosened. The following Friday, Amaka was invited to speak at a local youth conference. The theme was simple: identity in a world that wants you silent. As she stood before the audience, a sea of young faces, some eager, some skeptical, she felt no fear. "I used to think that being the only dark-skinned girl in a white school was my burden," she began. "I thought if I was quieter, nicer, smaller, maybe they'd accept me." She paused. "But then I realized, why should I shrink to fit a space that was never designed with me in mind?" Heads nodded, hands clapped. She smiled. "Your reflection isn't in their approval. Your mirror is in your history, your family, your art, your truth. Don't let anyone hand you a cracked mirror and tell you that's what you look like." Afterward, dozens of students came up to thank her, but one moment stood out. A little black girl, no more than 10, hugged Amaka tightly and whispered, "I want skin like yours." Amaka knelt down, holding the girl's face gently. "You already have it, sweetheart, and it's perfect." Back at St. Helena's, things were changing. Slowly, a new diversity council had been formed, not as a performative measure but with real student voices, including Amaka's. Teachers were undergoing proper anti-bias training, policies were being rewritten, but perhaps the most profound change was invisible: the shift in the students' consciousness. They could no longer claim ignorance. Not after Amaka had forced them to see. Heather Monroe was no longer the center of attention. She had apologized, privately, awkwardly, perhaps more for herself than for Amaka. But Amaka accepted it with grace, not for Heather's sake, but for her own peace. "I forgive you," she had said. But forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without letting it define me. That was power, real power. Months later, Melanin Mirrors became more than an online platform. With the support of local organizations, Amaka launched community art projects in schools across the state. Murals celebrating Black beauty, poetry slams highlighting marginalized voices, workshops on colorism. What started as her defense became her legacy. Amaka was invited to share her journey on national panels, podcasts, and magazines, but through it all, she remained grounded. Because for her, the true victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in every black girl who walked into school with her head a little higher. It was in every classroom where teachers dared to challenge their own biases. It was in every parent who started a new conversation at the dinner table. Amaka Okafor had become the voice she needed to hear at her lowest. And now, she was making sure no one else had to wait so long to hear theirs. On the anniversary of her first day at St. Helena's, Amaka stood in front of the mirror. Not the one the school had tried to hand her, not the cracked one society offered, her own. She traced the lines of her face, admired the richness of her skin, the way it held light, not in spite of its depth, but because of it. She smiled. For the first time, it wasn't a shield, it was a celebration. Amaka Okafor, the girl they tried to erase, had painted herself into the canvas of their world, and she was never fading again.